Morning, everyone. I had to shut off my phone is hooked up to my hearing aids, and I'm watching the post office hearing. So I thought I'd join you today. I think there's nothing new going on. It's interesting. We've got a Democrat now that's actually a letter carrier in the past, and of course she's using her expertise to make sure that the Postmaster General um, knows everything that she knows and does everything properly. So, um, Postmaster General DeJoy was brought in today, along, by the way, with a member of the Board of Governors who is on a Zoom conference. And by the way, he's been asked almost no questions, except, of course, whether he was a Republican or not. And we'll get to that. But this hearing is interesting. You might be confused about it because you think the House has already voted to give the post office $25 billion more dollars, and they've also voted to tell the post office general that he can't make any more changes until legislation comes back in and tells him he can. By the way, any changes, not just the sorting machines and the so-called sorting machine fiasco in the post office box. He's been told he can't make any changes. So we'll get back to that a little bit. So I've got I'm going to skip around today, just observations I've made and things I've seen. I've got 4 pages here. I hope it'll go quickly. So first of all, the Postmaster General made it clear that he's not cut overtime. The overtime rate was 13% before his appointment and remains at 13%. Can you imagine? So we're paying the average postal worker 113% of base pay. No, that's not quite right because they may get certain overtime rates that are over and above that. So at a minimum, we're paying 113%. So, apologize. So, and now my my hearing went right back live. So, observation, you've been put in charge of a large organization and you see this overtime rate. Do you think this is a well-run operation? Not part of the post office running at 13%. The average overtime rate is 13%. We all know what that means. Somebody's getting 20 and 30% overtime rate. So you're in charge. You look at this number. Is that a well-run organization? Interesting question. So the other question I'd ask you, for those of you people that have managed people that can get overtime, what are the results of long-term overtime pay? What are those results? Do those people depend on that? Do they build up their monthly expenses to match their income? That's been my observation. Yours may be different, but most people, after years of an overtime rate like that, look at it as part of their pay. By the way, many of these are union workers. That overtime pay is very well protected. So speaking of unions, what do you think the union's position is on this overtime pay? That's an easy question, right? Maybe unless you're a union worker, but even if you're a union worker, and you got to be honest, is they're going to protect that overtime pay. So I think that's real clear. So when you hear various postal workers commenting, find out if they're a union worker. By the way, there's five different unions. I may have that low. There may even be more than that represented in the post office. So the other thing he made it clear to Joy is he's not ordered any mailboxes or sorting machines, okay, or postal workers layoffs to be removed. This was in process before he entered office. It's being done on an ongoing basis. Postal boxes was being removed and sorting machines all during the Obama presidency. Never was an issue until now. What's the difference? Well, the Republicans are in charge of the post office. You might argue that. And and all of a sudden, many areas in the country are demanding within the next few months a massive shift to mail-in ballots. This is the issue that's driven this. Remember this. By the way, there were no election office officials there today. It's called as witnesses, just the post office. So get this straight. The election issue is all about the post office. Nothing about election officials that have demanded that 2 to 3 days before an election day, you can ask for an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot, 2 or 3 days before. When the post office general said, you're stressing our system can't handle that, and you know that. So Congress people were speaking from a WebEx. I heard it referred to as a WebEx. That is one of the, it's a competition to Zoom, primarily used by businesses, not by just normal people. But they were speaking from WebEx. Seemed like about half the Congress people were there in Washington. The other half are somewhere else. So get this straight. In the midst of an emergency, the COVID emergency that's really tearing this country apart, some of them came back to deal with the post office. No, not to deal with unemployment. No, they came back for the post office. But the other half decided to stay home or second home, wherever they are, vacation home, wherever. It's illuminative. By the way, very bad technology. Whoever managed this was doing a very bad job. They were breaking up. They were stepping over other people, continued on when they weren't supposed to. Very hard to understand. Many times the Postmaster General had to ask them to repeat the question or assume he knew what the question was. By the way, this Postmaster General has done one thing. And what he's done is institute a program where mail trucks need to leave on time. They have a schedule to leave. They've been running later and later and later, and it's jamming up the entire system. So he instituted a change that says mail trucks must leave on time. Okay. He said in the US alone, there's 700 to 800 extra mail truck trips per day. Okay. So this is the change he made. The other changes he didn't make. Okay. You can repeat this lie as often as you want, and it'll probably stick because enough people believe it. But he's made one change. And by the way, he insisted that that change stay put and that it was a good change. So some of the Congress people said people are complaining about delayed mail. I'm an old man. I've been hearing complaints about delayed mail forever. If you want to relate it to a new Postmaster General who's a Republican operative working directly for President Trump, have at it. But I think that's kind of disingenuous. We all know the reputation that the post office has. But I had a couple of observations about this. I watch my mail every day. In fact, I get informed delivery. I get an email. Think about this. It's not, if you want to get it on time to tell me about my email, send it by email. And that's what the post office is doing. It's a great service, by the way. So they give me a free service. I can go get my email every day, and I can see a picture of every email in my box. Guess what? Most days I look at it and say, it's garbage. I don't need to go to the post office. Or I don't need to go to my post office box, which is down the street, by the way. It's not a mailbox in front of my house anymore. So how many vital pieces of mail do you get? A friend of mine and I were discussing this earlier today. We think 80 to 90% of our mail is literally junk mail. 10 to 20% is meaningful mail. Even at that, we're trying to figure out whether it matters, whether it got here in 1 day, 2 days, or 4 days. By the way, how would you know if mail is late? Now, I guess you could see a postmark that happened 2 weeks ago, and you say, where's it been for 2 weeks? That would give you some indication. But most of my mail, I would have no idea it's late. I'm not even sure I care. I can't imagine a piece of mail I've had lately that's late. When people need to send me something on time, they don't use the mail system. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. They use alternatives, okay? And including FedEx. Somebody needs to get me something tomorrow. They FedEx it to me. So the mail stats from 2 weeks ago show a decline in delivery of mail, a delayed delivery of mail. Postmaster General claims this is true, said, but they neglected to look at the recent week's data, which shows it improving. And we'll get to that, reasons why that is true. Probably COVID had a lot of effect on this, and we'll get into that a little bit, what the Postmaster General said. So the Postmaster General noted that the previous Postmaster General and executive team was not reviewing on a regular basis the stats that showed whether mail was being delivered on time or not. Think about that. Did you hear what I just said? The executive team wasn't reviewing. I forgot to get my comments here on the screen here. Good morning, Southern California. So I apologize, I didn't see that earlier. So the executive team wasn't looking at it. He says, I've changed things. They're now looking on a regular basis, have noted it, and are working on it. That's good news, by the way. It sounds like we've got an executive in charge that understands data and is looking at it. So post office required to be self-sustaining. And many of you don't understand that. They think that the post office can get all the money it ever needs from the government. They have a legislature. Think about that. The very Congress that hauled this guy to grill him today has mandated that he does this self-sustaining. What does that mean? Don't make a profit, but don't lose money. Okay? Both sides of the equation. You can break even. Is he breaking even? No. $7-8 billion per year. So to support this, Congress is saying, we want to give you $25 billion, and we don't want you to make any changes the rest of the year without our permission. You think about this. The very Congress that legislated to run this at a break-even point is now saying, no, you don't need to do a break-even. We'll give you all the money you need, and don't need, by the way, if you do this properly, and please don't make any efficiency changes. Only a government could be running a business this way. Only a government. Anybody else would be taken out and shot. So keep running it as a loss. So here's another one. The Postmaster General was accused of conflict of interest by a result of his Trump and Republican donations. And then specifically, and this is where questions can become accusations. And you have to be very careful with this. Lawyers know better than this, but they do it on purpose. So a Democratic congressman asked him if he gave a bonus to his employees to compensate for their Republican donations. And you could tell he was very upset. And in fact, he really said his donations were made after he left his previous company. By the way, this recent legislation that's going to give the Postmaster General $25 billion and tell him not to make any changes, they didn't consult with him before passing that legislation. The very guy that they've got running the entire organization, 600,000 people, they didn't consult with him. They know better. And by the way, if you watch this whole thing, they really do know better. They didn't take his executive logistics knowledge in any case. They didn't take it in any case and consider it at all. A little comment on the post office union again. It came up a little bit, though Democratic congressmen and Congress people didn't ask any question about the unions and the unions working and their ability to make changes and their ability to be amenable to any changes, including drops in overtime or drops in labor rate. So I'll get back to that a little bit. Um, a pet peeve of my part, they call these hearings. They're not hearings, they're sayings. I call them sayings. Congressmen get before a camera and say things. And when they do ask for questions, they try to make it a yes, no answer, right? They love those, right? Limit the amount of information that can come from the witness. Now, they pulled the expert, the guy that runs the whole post office, they pulled him before him. Did they pull him before him to learn something or to say something to the cameras? I think we all know that. I call it an inquisition. And in fact, their common expression is, I have limited time. That means I have limited time, so I want to shut you up, but my conversation can take all the time. That's what that means when I have limited time. It really means you have limited time because I get to limit it. They need to change this. They need to get some Congress people in Congress that says when we have a hearing, we're going to listen, okay? The very thing that they say they do to their constituents out in the field. I need to get back out there and listen to my constituents. When they get the expert in front of them, do they listen? No. By the way, the Postmaster General was appointed by a bipartisan Post Office Board of Governors. It was unanimous. This is not a Trump appointment for those of you people that think this was a Trump appointment. A note made there to maybe clarify some of this. By the way, this is very embarrassing. The chairwoman of the hearing, her election in the East Coast took 6 weeks to count due to mail-in ballots. 6 weeks. By the way, you would think this would be part of the discussion that she had, right? Oh, she had to spend a lot of time on this mess of election with lots more mail-in ballots, right? Had to be because post office took care of a lot of these ballots. No, she never mentioned it once. Not once. Okay? She didn't discuss it. Why? Because the Postmaster General could point out that the election offices were still accepting applications for absentee votes days before the election. In other words, you had to get the absentee ballot, absentee request form in the mail, then send it back to them. They authorized, sent you a ballot, and then you had to fill out the ballot and send it back to them, all within a matter of days. Impossible. Any of us that would look at that, any common sense person would look at that and say, this is not going to work. You're going to get ballots way too late to the people to vote, way too late for the post office to process it, and therefore we're going to delay the election. Be careful. Are we asking for this in a presidential election? Another friend of mine and I discussed this morning. If you look at the post office, why do we have the UPS? Why do we have the FedEx? So they were all put in place to address issues with the current post office, right? They took advantage of restrictions, congressional constraints on changing the post office. Remember, it's very difficult to change the post office. You have to get everybody's permission, including all these Congress people that aren't legislating today. So why do we have them? You know, some people note that the UPS actually takes longer than priority mail and makes a lot of money at doing it. Think about that. They take longer than priority mail and make a lot of money at it. These people went in and looked at the current post office structure and said, we'll take what we want to out of it, and we'll do it with superior logistical system. Remember, the FedEx model says, when everybody says they were crazy, right? FedEx model says we'll route everything through one city, Memphis, Tennessee. Everybody says, you are crazy. By the way, this friend of mine we were discussing this morning, this was a MBA study done. I forgot which college it was done at. But they looked at it and said, this is logistics. And if you want to efficiently do this, run it through one sorting operation and get it back and run planes all night long when people are sleeping And you can do this. You can get your mail overnight, your envelope, your FedEx envelope, to Memphis, 2 hours. You can sort it in an hour or so, get it back on another jet, back to your city in just a couple more hours while you're sleeping. If the post office is so great, why were they able to do this? So the other thing you hear the Democrats say, in fact, it had to be a talking point that was routed around last night to all of them. Make sure you mention our older citizens who are waiting for life-saving drugs. And by the way, Social Security checks. I don't know of anybody that I know that's getting a Social Security check through the mail anymore. It's crazy. But the life-saving, remember they had that life-saving drug. If they don't get it tomorrow, they die. Okay? Nonsense, as a friend of mine calls it. This is a red herring. Many people on over-the-mail pharmacy systems use a 90-day supply. That supply is well on their way before they ever get. In fact, as a friend of mine noted, when you try to go to your 90-day mail order pharmacy company and say, I need drugs in 2 days, they will tell you, sorry, go to your local pharmacy. We're not in the business of doing that. We do planned drugs quarter after quarter, and we do it in plenty enough time for you to get it done there. You want quick orders? Go to your local pharmacy. Note to dying Democrats that need drugs that are waiting on your postman. Drive 5 miles to your local Walgreens, your local Walmart, and get your prescription renewed. This is like the well, I won't go there. This makes no sense whatsoever. It's a red herring, and because one of the problems they're having is how they got to show that the mail system is so important and our whole economy depends upon it. I go back to 90% of my mail being nonsense. By the way, the COVID, it's convenient now. They're able to bring the post office and saying you're having issues right now with the mail system. Postmaster General says at one time he had 40,000 employees out because of COVID. 40,000 employees. 3% are out right now nationwide of the post office. 3% nationwide out because of COVID. But he said the real issue is in some major cities that are hit hard by the COVID, he's out 20%. 20% down. You're running a company and you're 20% down in employees. How do you think this is working? You think you can get your mail in time? They've got the same issue that a lot of other companies. What I fail to hear, and I want to point this out because you never hear this in congressional hearings. I never heard a congressperson saying, Postmaster General, we know you're in the midst of an emergency like we've never seen before. What can we do to help you when you've got 40,000 employees out because of COVID? What can we do to help you? They're not there to help that Postmaster General. They're there to make political points. By the way, both sides are making political points. Don't get me wrong. I thought of myself as being a prior executive and running large groups of people in large organizations. And I thought of somebody calling me up, which is a little bit humorous, and saying, Lee, we'd like you to run a large federal organization. Why would any competent executive leave private business to run a government operation, knowing that you would be the person to be called in these hearings, or what I've called earlier sayings, right? You're going to be called in and raked over the coal and really take your personal life apart. Everything you've done personally will be exposed if it is a means to their execution of you. Remember, it's an inquisition. So everything is on the table, and we'll talk about a few that were on the table. Why would you do it? You wouldn't. We're gonna build a government that puts incompetent people in place because the competent people are going to say, forget it. I'm not going to put my family through that. And by the way, if you think I'm wrong, look at the last 3 or 4 Supreme Court justice hearings. You think I'm wrong? You watch your daughters sit on the front row of that hearing gallery, and your wife, and have to go through that. You going to put your family through that? I think not. If you've got any competence whatsoever. Another observation I made: the Congress people are the experts. They were telling the logistical expert, who's, by the way, managed a very successful company, made millions of dollars managing, turned around a mess of a trucking company into a worldwide great company. They're telling him how to run the post office. Imagine the insanity. One of the congresspersons says, Congressperson, Postmaster General, there's one of these sorting machines that you've unplugged from the ceiling. It's still sitting there. All you have to do is plug the machine back in. Can you imagine the size of operation? One machine is unplugged somewhere, and a congressperson says, Postmaster General, just go to that post office and plug the machine back in. Everything will be wonderful. Can you imagine the insanity? All this knowledge of the mail process. I wonder how many of these people have ever been in a mail sorting operation. Sounds like we've had one that spoke just as I went live. By the way, of this organization, there's 300,000 union workers. We're going into the largest mail by ballot election we've ever had. And these 300,000 union workers have come out publicly and said that they support Biden. They've also given a large amount of money to Biden's campaign. So think about this. Should we be concerned? Was there any hearing? And I pointed out earlier, was there a union head that's in there that is being asked the tough questions about, remember, and we're going to get to it a little bit, the contributions that the Postmaster General's made to the Republican organization. Are we going to hear about any of these stated Democrat leaders of the union said, we support Biden, we want him to win, we are going to help him win with money. I'm willing here to answer any of your questions about any other help we may be. It's a tough accusation, but it goes both ways. By the way, one of the congresspersons says, what if, Postmaster General, what if we just gave you $1 billion and told you to reconnect all the machines? What is the harm? Only in Washington. We've already decided, by the way, before this ever got in place, before Trump even took over, we've decided that these machines are not needed anymore. And we've started disconnecting them at hundreds every year. This year, I think the rate is 600 machines. We've already decided that. And now we have a congressperson that says, what's the harm in giving you $1 billion, by the way, that you don't need? You're trying to save money. We understand, but we're going to throw away $1 billion so you can reconnect these machines and not use them. But the image will be great for this election, right? Only in Washington does this make sense. And by the way, only in Washington would you say it on live TV. Okay, we know there's only a few nuts like me that watch this live TV. By the way, Postmaster General answered this really well. He says, in 10 years, you've given me no legislation to help the post office. You've given me no money to help run the post office. Yet today, you're going to give me $1 billion. And by the way, he agreed to it because he said, you won't give me the $1 billion. He's given evidence that says, look, 10 years you haven't given me any money. And today you're going to give me $1 billion to throw machines I've already told you are redundant and not needed. Only in Washington. I repeat myself. I note again, no one's asking from the Congress on how they can help. So here was the personal attack on the Postmaster General. They had records of his giving to Republican causes. $3.2 million he's contributed, supposedly according to the records. They asked him, in fact, had he give that? And he said yes. In fact, by the way, it's classic Barr. Barr did the same thing, and I loved it. He said, yes, I am a Republican. So, observation. Only in Washington is being a Republican is being a criminal. By the way, that was insinuation. Because he's a Republican, he's trying to wreck the post office right before a major election. That was an insinuation. It was very clear what the insinuation was, and he did not take it very well, the Postmaster General. So, interesting that we believe if you give money to a party, you're a criminal. And by the way, it makes anything you do from this point on suspect because you've given money to one party. By the way, the people on the other side asking the questions, right, which and not asking, giving you any time to answer them, they can give all the money they want, but it's okay. And all the people that give money to them, they're okay. They're not criminals because they're obviously giving it to a good cause. And anything that congressperson will do for those people that give them money is okay. The insanity of Washington right now is unbelievable. The last thing I want to leave you with is what kept coming up on this hearing are the lies. And by the way, it's two lies. That Postmaster General, you are slowing down the mail because you're taking sorting machines out and you're taking collection boxes out. And you're doing this on purpose right before a major election. He denied that multiple times and kept saying, look, all the letters, everything from Inspector General report and everything shows that that was happening before I came on board. I had nothing to do with those decisions. They were in place before. The only thing I did was stop them so that I could remove any possible inference to affecting this upcoming election, even though we all know, those of us that are pulling it out know that it will have no bearing on our ability to sort ballots. By the way, he showed it various times that the ballots represent 3% of the mail volume for a typical month that the election happens in, 3%. He kept saying, this election ballot will be able to handle very, very well if the states will follow the recommendations we've given them, which some of them, by the way, have not. But my point is, you repeat a lie often enough, and it's the truth. And by the way, this is going on right now with Biden repeating the fine people hoax from Charlottesville. You repeat this enough, and if you have confirmation bias, you will believe it. Look up confirmation bias. So you'll believe it. And by the way, these post office lies, and by the way, that's what they are. They're lies. They're not mistruths. They're lies. People on that panel today understood that they were lies. He was telling them multiple times that they're a lie. The next congressperson would come up, ask the same question again about these sorting machines. Can you get them plugged back in? Can you stop this? Can you stop this damage you're doing? And finally, at the end, he said, I don't know how many times I've got to say this to tell you it's a lie. I hope you, and by the way, I wanted to add one more thing. Post office has made it clear that they don't need any more money. They've got enough money to last through next year. So imagine an organization that's been told they don't need enough money, even by the Board of Governors. They've got enough money to last through next year, but they need to make changes. So they need support of these changes, and they need legislative support. Imagine that group saying, we won't give you any legislative changes, any help at all, but we're going to give you $25 billion. And by the way, we're going to stipulate that you can't make any changes this next year. None whatsoever. I got to tell you, if I was that executive, I would have stood up and said, folks, it sounds like the smartest people in the world are right here. They know how to run that post office. Here, this post office is yours. Run the damn thing. Can you imagine a group that says, we won't help you with any legislation. We're going to give you $25 billion that you didn't ask for. We don't even know, by the way, what you're going to spend the $25 billion on. There's no stipulation on that. And by the way, don't do any of the changes that you were hired to go do. And by the way, the previous Postmaster General were working on it, and the previous Post Office Board, Governor's Board, and the Inspector General, the Independent Inspector General. But we don't care what any of them say. We're going to run the post office for you. This is the government you have running for you right now. As some other podcasters have noted, that sometimes it's best to get off before you say a swear word, and I try not to swear. Cheers. Have a great day.